Look, I am not saying I am a coward. Let me be clear about that right from the start. I have survived 3 corporate purges, 2 attempted assassinations, and 1 very unfortunate incident involving fermented Quellan fruit at a diplomatic reception. But when Ambassador Trelvik announced he was bringing a human as his personal security detail to the most volatile peace negotiation in galactic history, I may have, how do the humans say it, soiled my excretory garment. My name is Vorp, just Vorp. Single syllable, easy to remember, harder to mispronounce when someone is screaming it in terror. I work as the administrative coordinator for the Galactic Diplomatic Corps, which is a fancy way of saying I fill out paperwork while more important people make decisions that could obliterate star systems. It is a living. The Kralix War had been dragging on for 17 standard cycles. 17. That is longer than most species take to develop interstellar travel, and these 2 civilizations had spent nearly 2 decades perfecting new and exciting ways to convert each other into component atoms. The Kralix Dominion and the Ferathian Empire had been at each other's throats, tentacles, and various other appendages since a border dispute that, honestly, nobody could even remember the original cause of anymore. Something about mining rights, or maybe someone insulted someone else's queen, or possibly it was about a trade route. Point is, thousands of planets were burning, trillions of beings were dying, and the entire galactic community was getting really, really tired of picking sides. That is where Ambassador Trelvik came in. The Quellan diplomat was famous, or perhaps infamous, depending on who you asked. He had negotiated the Treaty of Sandros. He had prevented the Thexian genocide. He had even convinced the Hive Collective to stop sending warships through civilian shipping lanes, which most people thought was impossible since the Collective did not technically understand the concept of civilians. But Trelvik had one peculiar quirk that made even his greatest admirers nervous. He collected bodyguards from Deathworld species. Not just hired them, mind you. Collected them, like some people collect rare crystals or ancient texts, except his collection could disembowel you in 17 different ways before you finished screaming. I had met some of them over the years. There was Krax from Duramon 5, whose skin could deflect plasma fire, and whose idea of gentle was merely breaking your arm instead of tearing it off completely. There was Seetha from the gravity wells of Corthan, who moved so fast she appeared as a blur and left a trail of unconscious attackers wherever she went. There was even Gorath, a silicon-based lifeform who could literally eat through starship hulls. But humans? Nobody brought humans to diplomatic negotiations. That was like bringing an antimatter bomb to a children's birthday party. Sure, it would definitely make an impression, but probably not the one you wanted. Humans had only joined the galactic community about 40 cycles ago, and they had spent most of that time making everyone extremely nervous. They came from a planet that was, to put it mildly, aggressively hostile to life, Earth. Just saying the name made most species shudder. A death world so ridiculous that evolution there had apparently given up on subtlety and just started throwing natural disasters at everything until something survived. The humans survived, and then thrived. And then built spacecraft out of pure spite and stubbornness. I remember when the first human delegation arrived at the Galactic Congress. They were polite, cheerful even, with these bizarre facial expressions that showed way too many teeth when they were happy. They brought gifts, they shared cultural information, they seemed, against all odds, like they might actually be reasonable neighbors. Then someone made the mistake of starting a fight in the diplomatic quarter, and one of the human security officers broke up a brawl between 3 armed Thexian warriors and a cybernetically enhanced Corthan enforcer using nothing but his bare hands and what he called aggressive negotiation. He did not even look winded afterward, just straightened his uniform, smiled that disturbing tooth-filled smile, and asked if anyone needed medical attention. The Thexian warriors needed medical attention, a lot of it. After that, everyone started paying much closer attention to human capabilities. Military analysts went through their databases. Xenobiologists studied their physiology, and slowly, horrifyingly, the galaxy came to understand what evolution on a death world actually produced. Humans could endure G-forces that would liquefy most species. They could heal from injuries that would be fatal to almost anyone else. They could go without sleep for days through sheer willpower. Their stamina was absolutely absurd. And perhaps most terrifying, They seemed to actually enjoy dangerous situations. They had words for it: adrenaline junkies, thrill seekers, soldiers. Oh, the soldiers. Every species has warriors, but human soldiers were something else entirely. They did not just fight. They optimized combat into a science. They studied warfare the way most species studied art. They wrote manuals, developed doctrines, created entire philosophies around the concept of organized violence, and then they got creative. But all of this was abstract knowledge until the day Ambassador Trell-Vic walked into the orbital station with his new bodyguard, and I got my first look at a human up close. Her name was Kade Torrens. Not Commander Torrens, not Captain Torrens, just Kade Torrens, civilian contractor, which somehow made it worse. She was not particularly tall by human standards, maybe 1.7 meters, with dark skin and darker eyes that seemed to catalogue everything in the room within seconds of entering. Her hair was cut, short, practical. She wore a simple black suit that looked formal enough for diplomatic circles, but moved like she could sprint or fight at a moment's notice. She also smiled when she saw me staring. That thing humans do, where they show their teeth, which every reasonable species in the galaxy interprets as a threat display, but humans somehow think means friendship. "Vorp, right?" she said, her voice surprisingly warm. "Ambassador mentioned you run a tight ship here. Looking forward to working with you." I may have made a noise. It was not dignified. Trell-Vic found it amusing. "Vorp tends to be cautious around new security personnel," the ambassador said, his translator rendering his Quellan whistles into standard galactic common. "I believe he still remembers the incident with Krax and the refreshment cart." "That cart never hurt anyone," I muttered, until Krax decided it looked suspicious. Kade laughed. Actually laughed, like the memory of destroyed furniture was genuinely funny. "Don't worry, I am much better at distinguishing threats from catering equipment." Usually, she said usually. The Peace Summit was being held on Neutral Station Gamma, a massive orbital platform positioned exactly equidistant from both Kralix and Ferathian space. It had been built specifically for high-level negotiations, with enough defensive systems to repel a fleet and enough luxury amenities to keep diplomats comfortable while they argued about who got to keep which star system. Security was, as you might imagine, extremely tight. Both sides had brought military escorts. The station itself had its own formidable defense force. There were scanning fields, automated turrets, shield generators, and enough armed guards to invade a small moon. Nobody was taking chances. This was either going to end the war or start an even bigger one, and everyone was very aware of which outcome was more likely. The Kralix delegation arrived first, 6 of them, all massive, all covered in thick armored plates that had evolved for survival on their high-gravity world. They communicated through low-frequency sounds that rattled your bones if you stood too close. Their lead diplomat was named Gormath, and he had the personality of a grinding machine, efficient, relentless, and absolutely devoid of anything resembling humor. The Ferathians came next, insectoid, graceful in that unsettling way that creatures with too many joints tend to be. Their carapaces shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that supposedly conveyed emotional states, though I had never been able to tell the difference between angry shimmering and contemplative shimmering. Their head negotiator called herself 17 Spirals of Dawn, which was apparently a shortened version of her actual name. I did not ask for the long version. Both sides brought security, lots of it. The Kralix had warriors in full combat armor, each one capable of punching through a bulkhead. The Ferathians had their razor-cast, elite fighters whose bladed limbs could cut through most known materials. Everyone was armed, everyone was dangerous, and everyone was pretending very hard that this was all perfectly civilized. Then there was Kade, standing quietly behind Ambassador Trell-Vic, hands clasped in front of her, looking about as threatening as a particularly stern accountant. I saw the Kralix security chief assess her with what I assumed was contempt. I saw one of the Ferathian razorcast actually click in what their species used for laughter. Neither side seemed particularly impressed by the human. That should have been my first clue that something interesting was about to happen. The negotiations began in the main conference hall, a circular room with a domed ceiling that showed the stars beyond. Very symbolic, very elegant. Very easy to fill with corpses if things went wrong, which is probably why it was also ringed with emergency bulkheads and had no fewer than 40 surveillance systems recording everything. Ambassador Trelvik was brilliant as always. He spoke carefully, acknowledged grievances, proposed solutions that somehow made both sides feel heard without actually conceding anything important. He was patient, methodical, professional, and it was working about as well as expected, which is to say, not at all. Gormath wanted territorial concessions. 17 Spirals wanted reparations. Both sides wanted the other to admit fault. Neither side was willing to give an inch. After 3 hours, we had accomplished exactly nothing except confirming that yes, both civilizations still hated each other very much and were willing to continue the war indefinitely rather than compromise. I was taking notes, mostly because someone had to document this disaster for the inevitable historical inquiry about how we failed to prevent galactic catastrophe. Kade stood behind the ambassador, still looking mildly bored, occasionally glancing around the room like she was counting ceiling tiles. That is when the Kralix security chief made his move. I want to be absolutely clear about what happened next, because even now, cycles later, people still argue about the exact sequence of events. Some say it was planned, some say it was instinct. Some say the human had psychic abilities, which is ridiculous because humans definitely do not have psychic abilities. They just have really, really good pattern recognition and an apparently supernatural ability to sense when things are about to go catastrophically wrong. The Kralix security chief, a massive specimen named Dravok, suddenly moved toward Ambassador Trelvik, not slowly either. He covered the distance in maybe 2 seconds, which for a creature his size wearing full armor was genuinely impressive. His arm was raised, and I could see the glint of something metallic in his fist. A blade, maybe, or possibly an energy weapon disguised as jewelry. Hard to tell when everything is happening fast enough to state, make your brain skip. Every security officer in the room started reacting. The other Kralix warriors moved to intercept their own chief, clearly as surprised as everyone else. The Pharathian Razorcast shifted into combat stances. Station security began reaching for weapons. The whole situation was about to become a bloodbath that would probably reignite the war and also definitely kill everyone in this room, including me, which I was particularly opposed to. Then Kade moved. I have watched the security footage approximately 237 times. I have analyzed it frame by frame. I have consulted with xenobiologists, combat specialists, and even a few human military advisors who have since joined the Galactic Corps, and I still cannot fully explain what I witnessed. She covered the distance between her position and Dravok faster than he had moved, just faster. Her hand caught his wrist before his weapon, whatever it was, could reach the ambassador. There was a twist, a rotation that looked almost casual, and suddenly Dravok was airborne, not thrown, not pushed, redirected. His own momentum used against him with such precision that he sailed over a conference table and impacted the far wall hard enough to crack the reinforced paneling. The entire room froze. Kade stood exactly where Dravok had been, now holding his weapon, which turned out to be a molecular disruptor disguised as a ceremonial bracelet. She examined it for maybe half a second, then carefully placed it on the conference table in full view of everyone. "I believe this is a violation of summit protocols," she said calmly, her voice carrying perfectly in the sudden silence. "Weapons of this classification are explicitly banned in diplomatic spaces. Section 7, Paragraph 12 of the Neutral Station Security Charter." She quoted the regulation, from memory, while a Kralix warrior who outweighed her by probably 300 kilograms groaned on the floor. Gormath rose from his seat slowly, very slowly. His bone plate ridges were doing something I had never seen before, which my translator unhelpfully informed me indicated profound shock mixed with grudging respect. "The human speaks truth," he rumbled. "Dravok has shamed the Dominion. This was not sanctioned. I will give the Kralix this much credit. When they acknowledge a mistake, they do not mess around." 2 of their warriors immediately moved to restrain Dravok, who was still trying to remember which way was up. Gormath made a formal gesture of apology that I recognized from diplomatic briefings, the kind of apology that carried serious weight in their culture. "Ambassador Trelvik, this betrayal of summit protocols is unacceptable. Dravok acted alone, driven by extremist elements within our military faction who oppose these negotiations. He will face Dominion justice. You have my word." 17 Spirals had gone completely still. her bioluminescence cycling through colors I definitely did not recognize. When she finally spoke, her voice had that clicking quality that Ferathian translators struggled with. The human neutralized a Kralix shock trooper in combat armor without lethal force, she said, and I realized she was not talking to us, she was talking to her own security detail, in 0.3 seconds, using only physical redirection and leverage. One of the Razor caste made a gesture that I later learned meant something between professional admiration and existential horror. Kade, for her part, simply returned to her position behind Ambassador Trelvik, hands clasped again, expression neutral. Like she had just picked up a dropped stylus instead of preventing an assassination and possibly saving the entire peace summit. "Shall we continue?" Ambassador Trelvik said pleasantly, as if nothing had happened. As if his bodyguard had not just performed what military analysts would later describe as a textbook example of close-quarters threat neutralization against Abyss Fall. Superior opponent in full combat gear. The negotiations continued, but something had shifted. Gormath kept glancing at Kade. Not obviously, but I noticed. The Ferathian delegation was having a quiet conversation through their bioluminescence that seemed increasingly animated, and the security personnel from both sides had stopped posturing and started watching the human with the kind of attention you normally reserve for unexploded ordnance. An hour later, we took a recess. Standard diplomatic procedure. Give everyone time to consult with their governments, pretend the assassination attempt had not just happened. I found myself in the administrative office, trying to process paperwork with hands that would not quite stop shaking. Kade walked in, carrying 2 cups of something hot. She offered me one. "Station coffee," she said. "It is terrible, but it is warm and caffeinated. Figured you could use it." I took the cup because refusing seemed rude, and because she had a point about the caffeine. "You just stopped a war." "Maybe," she said, sitting down across from me. "Or maybe I just stopped one Kralix extremist from making things worse. Hard to say yet." "You moved so fast," I said, then immediately felt stupid for stating the obvious. She shrugged. Dravok telegraphed his intentions about 4 seconds before he moved. Body language, breathing pattern, micro-expressions, plus his heart rate spiked, which you can actually hear if you know what to listen for. Plenty of time to intercept. "Plenty of time," I repeated weakly. 4 seconds is plenty of time. "For threat assessment and response?" "Sure." She sipped her terrible coffee like it was perfectly normal. I spent 6 years doing close protection work in some of Earth's more interesting locations before going private. You learn to read situations, or you do not last long. Your planet sounds horrifying. "Oh, absolutely," she agreed cheerfully. "But it prepares you for pretty much anything. Which is kind of the point, I think. Evolution on Earth was not about becoming the strongest or the fastest. It was about becoming the most adaptable. And humans got really, really good at adapting." Before I could ask what that meant, Ambassador Trelvik appeared in the doorway. "Kade, both delegations have requested a private meeting. With you present." She raised an eyebrow. "That is unusual." "That is unprecedented," Trelvik corrected. "They specifically want to speak with my human security consultant. I believe your demonstration has given them ideas." The private meeting took place in a smaller conference room with just the delegation heads, their immediate advisors, Ambassador Trelvik, Kade, and me taking notes, because apparently I was just along for this entire bizarre ride now. Gormath spoke first. "Human Torrens, your combat efficiency is remarkable. The Dominion has encountered human military forces in joint operations. We respect their capabilities. But seeing such skill displayed personally gives me perspective." "What kind of perspective?" Kade asked carefully. "The perspective that continuing this war is strategically inadvisable if it risks drawing human military intervention." I choked on my coffee. 17 spirals made that clicking sound again. "The Dominion admits weakness?" she said, sounding surprised. "The Dominion admits reality," Gormath corrected. "We have been fighting the Ferathian Empire for 17 cycles. Billions dead, countless resources consumed, and for what? Border systems that will take generations to rebuild, pride that has cost us actual strategic security." He gestured to Kade. "This human stopped our finest shock trooper without even breathing hard. Humans have hundreds of billions of such warriors, some even more capable. Why would we continue exhausting ourselves fighting you when such potential threats exist elsewhere? It was possibly the most pragmatic thing I had ever heard a Kralik say. It was also completely accurate, which made it worse. Or better, depending on your perspective. 17 Spiral's bioluminescence shifted to what I was pretty sure indicated thoughtful consideration. The Empire has also studied human capabilities. We reached similar conclusions. Our war with the Dominion has depleted our resources and attention at a time when the galactic community is expanding rapidly. New powers are emerging, some potentially hostile. She looked at Kade. Your species represents a significant shift in galactic military dynamics. One we would prefer to meet as organized civilizations rather than as exhausted remnants of a pointless conflict. Ambassador Trelvik, to his credit, maintained his diplomatic composure, but I could see the satisfaction in his posture. This was exactly what he had hoped for, though probably not through the method of having his bodyguard casually demonstrate why humans were terrifying. So, Kade said slowly, you are both suggesting that mutual exhaustion combined with the emergence of humanity as a galactic power has provided sufficient motivation to seriously consider peace terms. Correct, Gormith said. Accurate. 17 Spirals confirmed. Kade looked at Ambassador Trelvik, who made a small gesture that I interpreted as permission to speak freely. For what it is worth, she said, humans have no interest in galactic conquest. We are still figuring out how to exist in an interstellar community without accidentally offending someone or breaking things. We would much prefer neighbors who are not actively destroying each other. Makes trade easier. Makes cultural exchange possible. Makes the galaxy generally less likely to explode. Your government shares this position? Gormith asked. My government shares the position that peace is more profitable than war, cooperation is more efficient than conflict, and having friends is better than having corpses. We are practical like that. It was possibly the least diplomatic way to phrase galactic policy I had ever heard. It was also completely honest, which apparently both delegations appreciated because they actually seemed to relax slightly. The negotiations resumed an hour later, and something remarkable happened. Both sides actually negotiated. Not posturing, not demanding, not threatening. Actually discussing terms, making concessions, finding compromises. It was like watching a miracle in real time, except the miracle was caused by everyone simultaneously realizing that continuing to fight was stupider than finding peace. 72 hours later, the Treaty of Neutral Station Gamma was signed. Border disputes resolved through neutral arbitration, reparations structured as mutual economic development, demilitarization schedules, cultural exchange programs, everything that diplomats dream about when they imagine successful negotiations. The Kraliks' war ended not with a bang, but with bureaucratic efficiency and shared pragmatic terror of what might happen if they kept fighting while humans were watching. I filed approximately 8,000 documents related to the treaty. I coordinated logistics for the signing ceremony. I made sure everyone got their commemorative copies with the fancy seals and the expensive paper that nobody would ever actually read but everyone wanted anyway. And through it all, Kade stood quietly behind Ambassador Trelvik, looking mildly bored, occasionally checking her datapad, being absolutely no trouble at all. The day before we left Neutral Station Gamma, I found her in the observation deck, watching the stars. 3 minutes, I said. She glanced at me. What? From the moment Dravok moved to the moment you neutralized him and placed his weapon on the table. Security footage confirms it was 3 minutes, 17 seconds. You ended a 17-cycle war in 3 minutes. Kade smiled. That human smile with too many teeth that I was finally starting to recognize as genuine warmth instead of a threat display. I did not end the war, Vorp. They ended the war. They were exhausted, stretched thin, looking for an exit strategy but unable to find one without losing face. I just gave them an excuse, a common external factor to point to, something bigger than their pride that made peace the logical choice. You made them afraid, I said. I made them think, she corrected. Fear is temporary, understanding is permanent. They understand now that the galaxy is bigger than their conflict, that new challenges are emerging. That cooperation might be their best survival strategy going forward. She paused. Plus, yeah, maybe a little afraid. Humans are good at inspiring caution. Your entire species is terrifying. We prefer charmingly dangerous, she said. "But I will take terrifying if it helps prevent wars." Ambassador Trelvik joined us, moving with that particular gait that Quellans used when they were pleased with themselves. "Kade, I have received 17 employment offers for you from various diplomatic missions. Apparently stopping wars through intimidating competence is now a desired skill set." "I'm very expensive," she said. "They know. They are offering anyway." I looked between them, these two beings who had just reshaped galactic politics through a combination of diplomatic skill and strategic demonstration of human capabilities. And I realized something. "You planned this," I said to Trelvik. "You specifically brought a human bodyguard knowing it would affect the negotiations." The ambassador made a sound that his translator rendered as amused acknowledgement. "I brought skilled protection because assassination attempts at peace summits are unfortunately common. That the protection happened to be human, and that both delegations happened to be aware of human military capabilities, and that a demonstration of those capabilities happened to occur at a moment of maximum psychological impact." He trailed off, meaningfully. "You are devious," I said. "I am effective," he corrected. "There is a difference, though admittedly, sometimes they overlap." Kade laughed. "I am just here to keep you alive, Ambassador. If that accidentally involves psychological operations and strategic intimidation, well, that is just a bonus." The transport back to the diplomatic station was quiet, peaceful. The kind of quiet that comes from knowing you have actually accomplished something meaningful instead of just pushing paperwork in circles. I looked at the signed treaty in its protective case, all those fancy seals and official stamps that confirmed the end of 17 cycles of war. I thought about Dravok hitting that wall. I thought about Gormath and 17 spirals carefully negotiating terms while glancing at the human who had demonstrated exactly why continuing their war was a bad idea. "Vorp," Kade said, breaking my thoughts. "You look contemplative. What are you thinking about?" "I am thinking that humans are going to change everything," I said honestly. "Your species is going to reshape how the galaxy operates, how we fight, how we negotiate, how we think about conflict and cooperation." She considered that for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe we will just be one more species figuring out how to exist alongside everyone else. Learning from you like you are learning from us. Growing together." That is surprisingly optimistic coming from someone who just ended a war through intimidation. "I contain multitudes," she said, grinning. "It is a human thing." And you know what? I believed her. Because if humans could be simultaneously terrifying and hopeful, dangerous and kind, capable of incredible violence and incredible compassion, then maybe there was hope for the rest of us too. The Kralix War ended in 3 minutes, but the real story took much longer to understand. It was about exhaustion and pragmatism and the sudden realization that the galaxy was bigger than anyone's pride. It was about finding exits from conflicts that had gone on too long. It was about having the wisdom to recognize when peace was actually the stronger choice. And yes, it was also about a human bodyguard casually demonstrating why her species was not to be trifled with, which definitely helped motivate the decision-making process. I went back to filing paperwork. Ambassador Trelvik went back to solving impossible diplomatic problems. Kade went back to standing quietly in corners, looking bored, being the most dangerous person in whatever room she occupied. And the galaxy kept turning. Slightly more peaceful than before, because sometimes the threat of overwhelming force is less about using it and more about making everyone reconsider whether their current course of action is really, truly worth the risk. That is the thing about humans, I eventually learned. They do not just bring violence to the table, they bring the option of violence, which is much more useful. Because the option makes people think, makes them calculate, makes them realize that maybe, just maybe, there are better ways to solve problems than blowing each other up. 3 minutes, 17 cycles of war, 1 human bodyguard, 1 very tired administrator taking notes, and somehow against all reasonable odds, peace, humans, terrifying, efficient, surprisingly optimistic humans. The galaxy would never be quite the same. And honestly, I think that might be a good thing.